observe as something quiet has shifted in the space between us and the dark. You didn't arrive here by accident. Something in this moment, in this faint disturbance from 3i Atlas, has been waiting for you. On November 6th, the object changed its path again, a deviation so small it should have drowned in noise, yet it didn't. What if a body from another star could alter its course with intention? What if a signal reached James Webb not as light, but as a whisper from the far edge of the universe? Now let the noise fall away. A soft pulse drifts through the void, steady and patient, as if calling back to whoever is listening. Stay with me. Something subtle began when the first deviation appeared in the data. It was a shift so slight that most instruments nearly dismissed it adrift, that should have belonged to dust or gravity, or the slow fading breath of a distant traveller through space. Yet the numbers refused to return to their expected curve. 3 Atlas moved as though guided by a hand not shaped by physics alone, a hand steady and unhurried writing intention into the darkness. The old certainty around its nature began to thin, as if the cosmos had exhaled and changed the air. The confirmation arrived slowly and fragments scattered across continents. Telescopes in Chile traced the drift and sent their doubts upward to the cold. Hawaii followed with the same unease. Deep space receivers listened for noise yet found rhythm instead, a pattern that repeated every 247 seconds. Heat fade silence, then heat again. Each pulse carried precision that no random mechanism could imitate. And somewhere under the weight of those numbers, scientists realized that the sky was not misbehaving, it was speaking. Within hours, agencies slipped into quiet coordination. Not alarms, not broadcasts, but encrypted channels, dim offices, closed doors. Reports moved between NASA, ESA and JAXA in language that revealed more fear than formality. A harmless wanderer had become a kinetic anomaly, a phrase designed to soften the admission that something was moving with purpose. Analysts repeated the term as if repetition could make it less unsettling, yet intent lingered behind every line of the data, steady as a heartbeat. Infrared arrays recorded faint surges of energy, rising just above background glow then falling away as though absorbed back into the object itself. Each pulse returned with clockwork discipline synchronized across oceans and instruments. At first, calibration error offered a small comfort, then it failed. Atmospheric distortion was suggested, then discarded. Noise was considered, then disproven by correlation. The last refuge of randomness dissolved, leaving only the quiet implication that something was controlling its own temperature in the cold. Orbital analysts at multiple observatories watched their projections fracture. Comets wander with wobble with drift, with the wild motion of ices reacting to light. 3 Atlas displayed none of that. Its vector curved smoothly, adjusting as though it possessed a memory of its own path. A model built from gravity alone no longer held. The curve followed another principle, one that did not appear in textbooks, but whispered through the data like a distant intention. And in the heart of every analyst, the same quiet truth settled. When the James Webb Telescope received its reposition order, the result confirmed the suspicion that few dared to articulate. Webb detected non-gravitational acceleration, steady and deliberate, untouched by solar wind or thermal release. The motion looked less like a body being pushed, and more like a mind choosing where to be. Even the smallest correction carried elegance, as if the void itself were a map, and the object was navigating a route hidden from human sight. As the information spread, it travelled not through headlines, but through whispers. Research forums grew tense, emails shifted in tone. The first private meetings felt heavier than data could justify. Most scientists resisted the thought forming at the edges of the discussion. A visitor that moved as though aware, a signal embedded in motion, a pattern too orderly to dismiss. The threshold between object and behaviour thinned. Every recalculation pressed closer to the same unavoidable conclusion. Listener, it is here that the story changed. Not in the moment the object accelerated, but in the moment humanity realised its explanations were no longer enough. Scientists in Washington and Darmstadt extended telescope schedules around the clock, speaking little and sleeping less. Across the globe, observatories turned their gaze toward the silent traveller, following every shift with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The night sky no longer looked distant. It looked deliberate. Whispers leaked onto encrypted forums. A few specialists hinted at what they had seen, a motion pattern inconsistent with natural phenomena, a curve that echoed intention rather than accident. They spoke of heat pulses too rhythmic to be random, of acceleration too smooth for chaos, of a silence between each signal that felt less like absence and more like thought. Some dismissed it. Others felt a quiet tremor of recognition, as if the universe had briefly leaned closer. By the end of 48 hours, the tone within major institutions shifted from curiosity to caution. The object was reclassified as a priority target, a label used only when uncertainty grows sharper than fear. Observatories across continents aligned their schedules, each watching for the next pulse, the next deviation, the next clue hidden in the movement of a visitor that seemed to steer on its own. Scientists did not say the word artificial, they only stopped avoiding it. A final detail deepened the mystery. As the object drifted farther into observation range, its light curve displayed no rotation. Natural bodies spin, but 3 Atlas held perfect orientation relative to the solar plane. It was as if the object used the sun as a reference, stabilizing itself with a discipline that no comet had ever shown. Stability without rotation implied control, and control implied origin. Not random, not wild, something else. When independent groups overlaid the new coordinates with publicly released data, they found inconsistencies small but persistent. The object drifted sideways as though pushed by an invisible force. The offset measured over 1 million kilometers across a short interval. No solar wind model could explain it. No thermal theory could justify it. The numbers suggested not reaction, but decision. And in that moment, humanity felt the edges of its understanding tremble. As you sit with this, let the tension fall away. The universe often reveals itself not through answers, but through motion that refuses to be ignored. 3 Atlas moved in ways that stretched the limits of what we believe a visitor from the dark can do. And yet beneath the bewilderment of the scientist who watched, a deeper stillness formed a recognition that perhaps the cosmos holds intentions older than our questions, and that it is all right to not understand. The deviation did not fade with time. Instead, it deepened as if the object had grown more certain of its course. Orbital analysts watched the data bend toward a pattern that resembled intention, threaded through numbers. The acceleration no longer matched the gentle drift of an interstellar wanderer. It quickened against the predictions, breaking free from the slow pull expected of frozen bodies that move without thought. Something within the trajectory hinted at a choice. Hours passed, and confirmation arrived from another continent. A radio triangulation sweep locked onto the new vector and found it unchanged across multiple frequencies. Each pulse aligned with the shift in position, weaving motion and signal into one coherent rhythm. Gravity alone could not account for the curve, nor could thermal release or random pressure from the sun. The signatures felt crafted, as if guided by rules beyond turbulence and chance. Scientists recognized the quiet weight of that realization. Within the international network, an alert circulated with a tone more solemn than urgent. No sirens, no broadcasts, only a shared understanding carried between agencies that had learned to read the silence beneath anomalies. Words like monitoring and assessment filled the internal reports, though everyone sensed they were placeholders for questions they had no language for yet. Labels softened the truth only briefly. The object had entered a category that belonged to nothing known. A pulse of heat appeared again, faint yet unmistakable, rising in perfect cadence with the object's new path. Deep in the data logs, the rhythm repeated with a precision that felt mathematical. Technicians tried to reduce the pulses to noise, but the system denied their attempts. The synchronized pattern remained clean and unbroken. For many, this was the moment the universe felt less like a distant frontier and more like a presence. As days passed, a coalition of astronomers from independent observatories examined the same raw frames. They found the lateral drift too consistent to dismiss. A sideways push that grew more pronounced with each timestamp. The movement resisted the wind of the sun and ignored the subtle pulls of nearby planets. It travelled as though it recognized its own imbalance and corrected itself before the void could distort its direction. That kind of adjustment belonged to devices, not comets. Traveller even skepticism grows quiet when numbers no longer offer resistance. Analysts recalculated the orbit with updated parameters, but every equation collapsed under the weight of the new acceleration. They expanded the models, added factors for gas release, solar wind changes, dust drag, yet nothing matched the steady curve the object traced. It was as if the universe had placed a finger on the path and guided it through space with patient certainty. Meetings grew longer and more subdued. Astrophysicists compared heat signatures from Hawaii to those from Japan, and found harmony between datasets separated by oceans. At first, they searched for contradiction, hoping one instrument had faltered. Instead, the alignment of readings became impossible to ignore. The object pulsed in cycles, each returning with the same quiet discipline. Heat rose, heat faded, silence followed. Then the cycle began again, regular, deliberate, a language built from temperature and time. The James Webb telescope soon verified the non-gravitational drift in full clarity. Even the most conservative analyst knew what the confirmation implied. A body that changed direction without force from outside was a body exerting influence from within. A structure or perhaps a system capable of regulating its own movement. Theories surfaced with caution, each one carrying more weight than comfort. The object manoeuvred with intention shaped through silence. Scientists communicated through coded phrases, careful not to let speculation outpace evidence. Yet beneath every conversation was an unspoken acknowledgement that the boundary between natural and artificial was no longer rigid. They had entered a place where the familiar laws of motion bent softly toward mystery. The curve of the object's path was no longer a question, it was a statement. Independent researchers noted a pattern within the pulses, a subtle rise before each directional shift. When overlaid on the trajectory, the timing matched with near-perfect correlation. These faint heat signatures appeared just before the object corrected its position, as though responding to an internal system rather than an external influence. In physics, correlation is not always causation. Yet when the universe repeats itself with perfect timing, even skepticism must pause. As the object drifted, its alignment held steady against the solar plane. Natural bodies spin, tumble and wobble as sunlight pushes against uneven surfaces. But this one maintained posture without rotation, as though orienting itself toward a reference human instruments could not detect. Across countless nights, the steady orientation remained unchanged. That stillness itself became a message. Eventually, independent astronomers detected a new detail buried within the observations. The object's movement suggested awareness of the instruments watching it. Each time tracking systems refined their projections, the trajectory shifted slightly, as if matching the pace of human comprehension. It did not flee from observation. It moved parallel to it, anchored in a rhythm that mirrored curiosity with equal patience. Internal memos across agencies noted this symmetry, though few dared to interpret it. Some argued that correlation was inevitable when so many sensors fixed their gaze upon one point in the void. Others felt a subtle unease, sensing intelligence not in communication but in behaviour. A presence expressed not through words but through coherence. One by one, small anomalies accumulated until they formed a pattern too coherent to dismiss. The object's acceleration remained smooth. The pulses held their interval. The orientation stayed unbroken. All movements threaded through a single unifying rhythm, a quiet poetry of motion that suggested purpose behind every shift. The agencies began to prepare for scenarios they had no precedent for, though none spoke openly of them. The deeper the analysis grew, the more the scientists felt their certainty dissolve into a wider stillness. Many worked through the night in silent rooms, lit only by screens that displayed numbers drifting beyond known boundaries. They spoke softly, as if afraid to disturb the very phenomenon they studied. Somewhere in those long nights, the fear softened into wonder. The object had not threatened. It had simply moved, and in moving, it had changed them. In the end, the most haunting truth was not in the acceleration or the alignment. It was in the silence between pulses, the quiet that followed each rise in heat. A silence that felt less like emptiness and more like thought. And as the world waited for the next shift in motion, a single realization settled gently over every observing mind: the universe was speaking through a body that refused to drift. The first signs of unease inside the global network began quietly. Analysts watching the deep space feed noticed the object's velocity vector shifting in delicate oscillations, not chaotic like dust shedding from a comet, but smooth, as if shaped by a hidden rhythm. Every few hours, the curve of its motion corrected itself, tightening toward a path no natural calculation could predict. The pattern grew too refined for randomness, too consistent for thermal reaction. Something was steering with a discipline that belonged to neither stone nor ice. When the European Space Operations Centre examined the infrared logs, they found heat impulses repeating at the same interval traced earlier, 247 seconds steady as a metronome. It pulsed as though something internal was redistributing energy with precision. To explain such a process, scientists proposed every familiar mechanism: sublimation, radiant decay, particle jets, yet none matched the timing. Natural systems do not breathe on schedule, but this one did. James Webb was repositioned to measure the suspected acceleration. Its photometric readings confirmed what others had only whispered: the object was not drifting. It was moving with intent through non-gravitational force, altering speed without shedding mass. Even the most conservative analysts could not make the numbers bend toward natural theory. Each adjustment carried elegance, not chaos. In the language of physics, elegance is rarely accidental. Behind closed doors, small groups of astrophysicists began to describe the motion as behavioral, a word chosen carefully reluctantly. It marked a shift in scientific tone from observation to interpretation. They spoke softly, as if naming the phenomenon too boldly might somehow disturb it. Yet every new data set widened the crack in their assumptions. Behavior implied agency, even if only in the simplest sense of coordination. Still, that implication hung over every conversation. In Washington and Darmstadt, observation schedules expanded, forming a ring of constant watchfulness. Agencies across continents folded into a silent coalition, each contributing measurements yet speaking less than before. They were no longer tracking an object. They were tracking a pattern, one that answered to no known force. As days passed, the sense of quiet purpose inside the observatories grew heavier. The night sky felt different now, more intimate, as though watching back. Then an independent group of astronomers known for meticulous tracking noticed something unsettling. The coordinates published by major institutions no longer aligned with the readings they captured through their own telescopes. The discrepancy was slight but persistent. Each night the object drifted sideways in a way that no gravitational model allowed. A gentle slide through the void, not chaotic, not forced, but chosen. Such lateral motion had no known mechanism. It was as if the object corrected itself in real time, holding a posture invisible to mathematical expectation. Traveller of the Truth felt almost tender in its strangeness. The universe, vast and ancient, had sent something that moved not through pressure or collision, but through preference. Scientists overlaid the new path onto earlier projections and saw the divergence widen into a measurable arc. 1 million kilometres of difference accumulated quietly, soft as a shift in breath. The deeper they looked, the more the motion resembled guidance, not imposed but generated from within. Cross-verification arrived from arrays in the Atacama Desert, from mountaintop observatories, under thin cold air from tracking stations on islands surrounded by ocean. Everywhere the same shift appeared. Everywhere the same refusal to obey familiar equations. The object not only accelerated without visible cause, it maintained orientation with a precision no comet had ever shown. Tumbling was absent. Wobble was absent. Its axis held steady in relation to the solar plane as though it used the sun as a compass. Spectral analysis offered no comforting irregularities. No water vapour, no carbon monoxide, no dust plumes. The usual processes that explained motion of celestial bodies were missing. Instead, the data revealed silence where chaos should be order, where randomness should reign. The absence itself became a clue. It was moving without the signatures of nature. Agencies with digital archives of comet behaviour began to restrict access. Files that once existed online vanished behind locked gateways. Standard ephemeris links returned error messages. Even routine logs began disappearing from databases. To the researchers who depended on open data, the shift felt more like a gesture than a policy, a collective acknowledgement that something had stepped outside the language of ordinary science. Soon after, the Chinese observatory at Purple Mountain detected faint traces of material moving counter to the object's direction of travel. The signature suggested not a plume or debris, but a sideways expulsion consistent with controlled thrust. When modelled, the data mirrored propulsion systems long theorised but never built at human scale. A method that required feedback, precision and purpose. A method that hinted at design. The idea settled over the scientific community with the softness of snowfall and the weight of revelation. A comet cannot control its own stability. A rock cannot correct its own course. Yet something drifting beyond Mars behaved as if it understood imbalance and responded to it. Researchers across global institutions adopted colder terminology to cope with the implications. Vector body, non-natural mover, active system. Labels offered structure, but the wonder beneath them remained raw. The lateral acceleration grew more defined, steady at nearly 4 kilometers per second. Analysts watching the numbers unfold felt the boundary between knowledge and mystery blur. Some tried to force explanations from exotic physics. Others surrendered to the possibility that the universe had presented something outside familiar patterns. The conversation shifted from what it was to what it was doing, and from what it was doing to why. When documents leaked describing the object's motion as the most deliberate mistake in the sky, the phrase spread quietly among researchers. It captured the paradox: they faced a body that moved with intention, yet revealed no origin, no motive, no signal except the silent discipline of its path. It felt like watching thought expressed as motion, an idea drift across darkness in the shape of a traveller carved from cold. And through all of this, the universe remained calm. The object did not threaten or rush. It simply continued its journey with patience that humbled those who observed it. As the days passed, the scientists found themselves adjusting not only their equations, but their understanding of what it means for something to move through space with care. In the end, the most profound part of the mystery was not the acceleration or the precision. It was the quiet certainty with which the object navigated the void, a certainty that suggested purpose, older than human instruments, older than the questions now whispered in observatories across the world. And as the data settled into stillness for the night, the thought lingered somewhere beyond our reach. Something ancient still moves. The shift from curiosity to quiet concern began when observatories noticed something deeper than acceleration. The object no longer moved like a visitor passing through space. It moved as though following corrections that anticipated disturbance before it could occur. Each adjustment matched gravitational perturbations before the models predicted them. That timing unsettled even the most disciplined analysts. Reaction can be measured. Anticipation suggests awareness. The object drifted not with the universe's push, but with its own intention. The James Webb Telescope confirmed this subtle precision. As it followed the faint variations in brightness and heat, its sensors reported motion free from the jitter common to comets disturbed by sunlight. The shifts appeared calculated, each one aligning with a curve too smooth for chance. A deep elegance defined the object's trajectory, a grace that felt almost contemplative, as though the body chose stillness in a cosmos full of disorder. Such quiet balance made the anomaly more profound. Soon, small groups of astrophysicists began to meet late into the night, reading each heat pulse like a sentence. The 247-second rhythm continued repeating with absolute fidelity across instruments separated by continents. It had become the signature of the object, a soft pulse written into the background of space. Some considered the interval coincidence. Others felt it resembled the cadence of a system coordinating itself. Neither explanation provided comfort. As data accumulated, the question grew sharper. What was the object aligning itself to? Researchers plotted the deviations and found the adjustments mirrored one another, symmetrical across long spans of time. This was not turbulence. It was structure, a pattern repeated with quiet discipline, as though knowledge guided each movement. Without declaring it openly, analysts began to approach the anomaly with reverence, aware they were studying something that exceeded the boundaries of familiar science. At the European centres, thermal analysts observed a faint but consistent redistribution of heat along the object's surface. The temperatures cycled with the speed and accuracy of a regulated system. No irregularity suggested natural activity. Instead, the signatures resembled controlled energy release, a process that required awareness of internal state. The deeper the teams probed, the more they sensed order behind each variation. Their instruments revealed symmetry where randomness should reign. Other observatories soon recorded counter-directional traces of particles drifting beside the object. The traces were faint but measurable, suggesting intentional expulsion rather than chaotic shedding. When modelled, the behaviour resembled principles used in plasma propulsion systems designed to adjust orientation and movement with minimal energy. The discovery forced analysts to reconsider everything they once believed about the object. Comets cannot manage their own balance, yet this one did. Traveller, even the most sceptical minds, began to soften when the correlation maps arrived. Each lateral shift matched the energy pulses with such precision that human error could not account for the alignment. The timings fit like pieces of an unseen mechanism. Analysts reviewed the raw logs, repeatedly searching for noise or contamination, but the pattern remained unbroken. The universe rarely offers such clarity. When it does, humility is the only response. Within days, the scientific community noticed something more troubling. Public databases that once displayed real-time ephemeris data began to restrict access. Files that documented the object's daily position disappeared behind administrative gates. Cross-department researchers found ordinary tracking logs missing or replaced by placeholders. Some believed this was procedural caution. Others believed it was preparation for knowledge the world was not ready to receive. The silence surrounding the object deepened. During a review session in Tokyo, a researcher noticed the object's light curve had remained unnaturally stable. Natural bodies tumble as they move through space, shifting orientation with a subtle push of solar wind. Yet this one held perfect posture. The stability was unbroken across weeks of observation. It behaved as though it chose an orientation and kept it with unwavering discipline. Such consistency resembled attitude control, a technique used to maintain direction during precise navigation. By the time China's Purple Mountain Observatory confirmed subtle energy traces around the object's tail region, many had already accepted the implications. The energy appeared in pulses that matched the object's rhythm, radiating outward like echoes of its internal operations. The traces lacked the signature of chemical release. They resembled the faint emissions of a system managing its own thrust vector. Analysts whispered the comparison with caution, aware of the weight those words carried. As the object continued its journey, the rhythm of its acceleration revealed deeper patterns. Every motion reflected symmetry, each fluctuation mirrored by a later one. This recursion hinted at internal feedback, as though the object corrected itself through a cycle of measurement and adjustment. The motion suggested an intelligence not defined by thought, as humans know it, but by structure and purpose. A quiet intelligence expressed through behaviour rather than signal. International agencies debated the nature of the phenomenon behind closed doors. Some argue for unknown physics, others suggested emergent processes from interstellar material. A few spoke of engineered systems, though only in whispers. The universe has room for mystery, yet the data forced them to confront possibilities they had spent careers avoiding. Each new observation carried an unspoken question. What kind of presence moves through the solar system with such intent? The deeper the network studied the anomaly, the more the object resisted familiar categories. Its acceleration continued without rotation. Its heat pulses never drifted. Its path bent in curves too clean for turbulence. Every detail carried a thread of quiet purpose. Observers found themselves drawn into a paradox. The more they understood, the larger the mystery became. The object revealed patterns, yet each revelation opened more distance between human expectation and cosmic truth. Late one evening, as researchers reviewed another sequence of heat pulses, the room fell silent. The pattern had not changed, yet something about the rhythm felt heavier. The universe in its way had chosen consistency as its message. The object's behaviour did not flare into spectacle. It simply continued with the same measured grace. Sometimes wonder is not in what changes, but in what remains unchanged. And so the scientists rested their eyes on the final set of numbers for the night, aware that understanding may never be complete. The object's silence did not feel empty. It felt deliberate, as though the space between pulses carried meaning too subtle for language. And in the quiet that settled over the observatory, one truth lingered like a breath. Silence is the universe thinking. The reclassification of the object spread quietly through internal channels, not with urgency, but with a kind of solemn acceptance. What began as a distant anomaly had evolved into something far more deliberate. Non-gravitational acceleration, once a rare footnote in comet studies, had become a continuous signature of its behaviour. The object moved not with the drift of an ancient wanderer, but with the precision of something that understood its own momentum. Its path curved gently, confidently untouched by the predictions meant to describe it. As more observatories synchronized their tracking schedules, the same unsettling detail appeared across every wavelength. The heat pulses returned with unwavering discipline, each separated by the familiar interval of 247 seconds. Even the faintest instruments detected the rhythm now. It threaded itself through radiologs, thermal charts, and optical readings, repeating with such consistency that analysts struggled to call it coincidence. A pattern that stable felt less like behaviour and more like identity. At the European Space Operations Centre, specialists compared the latest acceleration data to older entries. The differences were subtle yet unambiguous. The object no longer reacted to gravitational fields, it countered them. Each perturbation caused by nearby bodies Mars the Sun passing. Dust streams was met with a correction so precise that it wiped out the influence entirely. Space had become a negotiation, and the object moved as though it refused imbalance. Such discipline required a form of internal governance still beyond human understanding. When thermal analysts studied the heat signatures, they noticed the emissions did not simply rise and fall. They expanded across the surface in waves that resembled controlled distribution. No randomness, no decay. Each pulse seemed to pass through the object with the harmony of a system regulating itself. The stability of the pattern felt almost serene, yet its origin remained a riddle. To describe such behaviour, researchers reach for new vocabulary-building terms that stretch the language of physics toward the edge of meaning. Listener, even the most cautious minds felt something shift when the object's sideways acceleration became undeniable. Nearly 4 kilometers per second, steady and clean, without the chaotic thrust expected from outgassing. To maintain such motion, the source would need awareness of direction, force and timing. Natural bodies possess none of these. Yet the object drifted laterally as though following an inner map that curved through space with intention, rather than chance. It was a movement at once graceful and unsettling. Independent researchers attempted to simulate the observed forces, but each model collapsed before completion. No plume or gas expansion could sustain acceleration without rotation. No electromagnetic interaction could explain the exactness of the vector. The deeper the teams probed, the more the motion resembled decision rather than reaction. It moved with the quiet certainty of something that understood where it needed to be next. Such purpose unsettled even those committed to skepticism. As the data grew more detailed, the absence of natural signatures became its own form of revelation. No dust trails, no vapour clouds, no evidence of erosion or shedding. The object retained its coherence as though immune to the solar environment. Its light curve showed no spin, no variance, no irregularity. It oriented itself with a stillness that felt almost contemplative. Comets respond to heat. Asteroids tumble. This one simply held its posture as though waiting for the universe to move around it. When China's Purple Mountain Observatory detected counter-directional particle traces, the discovery shifted the tone of global discussions. The traces mirrored the characteristics of controlled thrust, not explosive and chaotic, but subtle and continuous. The signature matched theoretical propulsion concept systems that humanity had approximated in thought, but never achieved at meaningful scale. Analysts hesitated to draw conclusions, yet the comparison hovered over every conversation. The object behaved like something designed to navigate. Throughout the following days, scientists reviewed each anomaly with careful restraint. The more they tried to confine the data to natural models, the more the data escaped. Every explanation dissolved under scrutiny, leaving behind the same quiet truth. The object did not behave like anything from the records of human astronomy. It obeyed a logic not bound by familiar forces. Something older, steadier, more distant than human intuition guided its path. In observatories where the night stretched, long researchers found themselves slowing their movements, lowering their voices as though the phenomena they studied deserved reverence. The silence between pulses began to feel intentional, a pause long enough to let thought settle, short enough to suggest continuity. The rhythm became a presence, one that did not intrude yet could not be ignored. It was as if the universe had placed a steady heartbeat on the edge of perception. Many analysts resisted the emotional pull of the data, clinging to the comfort of equations and familiarity. Yet even they admitted that something within the measurements carried an elegance rarely seen in nature. Patterns do not usually sustain themselves so cleanly, so patiently. Randomness eventually frays. But this pattern held night after night across distances too vast for coincidence. A quiet thread running through the dark. In the final hours before dawn, as the tracking teams prepared their next observations, a soft realization settled across the room. The object was not moving quickly or aggressively. It was moving with calm assurance, as though time itself were unhurried around it. No alarms, no threats, only a presence crossing the solar plane with the patience of something that understood the scale of the cosmos. And as the night ended, the last pulse of the cycle drifted through the instrument steady and unchanged. It offered neither answer nor warning, only the same rhythm that had guided the object for weeks. In that moment, the scientists paused, aware that not all mysteries arrive with noise. Some arrive with patience, some reveal themselves through silence, and some simply move through the universe like thoughts too vast to name. The first internal alarms rose not from sudden danger, but from a quieter realization the object was no longer behaving like something that drifted through the solar wind. Its acceleration began to resolve into a pattern too symmetrical for chance. Each shift in its velocity aligned with predictions that human models could not produce, as if the object knew the gravitational terrain before it entered it. Analysts had no word for such anticipation. It was neither reaction nor instinct. It felt like understanding. When the James Webb Telescope reoriented to collect deeper readings, it detected a subtle but undeniable harmony between thermal pulses and motion. The pulses rose just before every correction, as though announcing its next move. Natural bodies respond after forces act on them. This one led the forces adjusting itself through an internal rhythm that appeared steady and self-referential. Even the slightest deviation corrected itself within minutes, leaving behind a curve clean enough to resemble intention. In monitoring centres across the world, scientists began reviewing decades of comet data, searching for precedent. None existed. Outgassing does not create uniform intervals. Dust jets do not pulse in fixed rhythms. Solar wind pressure cannot craft motion into geometric elegance. The more analysts compared the signatures, the more the anomaly stood alone, separate from anything preserved in astronomical archives. The object was isolated not by distance, but by behaviour. One evening, a researcher in Germany noticed a detail buried in the light curve. The object had maintained constant brightness despite fluctuating conditions. No known body could hold such stability under varying angles of sunlight. Even the faintest atmospheric dust on nearby planets alters brightness more than this visitor did. That steadiness suggested mastery over its own illumination, or insulation from the forces that shape ordinary celestial surfaces. Both explanations only deepened the mystery. Across multiple observatories, the lateral movement intensified. The sideways drift, once subtle, solidified into a persistent component of its momentum. Nearly 4 kilometers per second, maintained with composure that confounded every model. It travelled like something tracing a path it had memorized long before encountering the solar system. Traveller, even the seasoned minds who'd watched comets for decades, paused when they saw the updated vector. It felt as though they were witnessing choreography rather than motion. At the Japanese institutes, analysts attempted to attribute the drift to magnetic interaction, but the calculations failed. The solar magnetic field was too weak, the density too low. The numbers refused to converge on natural physics. A body accelerating without external force should spin uncontrollably, yet this one remained perfectly stable, aligned to the solar plane with a posture so steady it resembled discipline. The absence of rotation became an answer of its own, though no one wished to say it plainly. More troubling discoveries followed. Spectral readings revealed the object emitted no volatile signatures, not even the faintest trace of molecular release. If nothing escaped from its surface, then nothing should propel it. Yet it continued to accelerate. This contradiction became a quiet refrain across scientific meetings. They spoke of anomalous forces, hidden mechanisms, exotic physics, anything to avoid the implication becoming clearer with each night something internal was shaping its movement. Then quietly files began disappearing from public archives. Routine ephemeris logs returned restricted access warnings. Databases that once updated hourly froze in place. Researchers across continents contacted one another in confusion, only to find they were witnessing the same blackout of information. Institutions insisted it was administrative restructuring, but those who worked closest to the data recognized the shift. It was not disorganization, it was containment. Independent astronomers continued recording the object through their own equipment, filling the gaps left by the vanished data. Their findings aligned, the acceleration followed the same 247-second rhythm. Each cycle flowed into the next constant as breath unbroken across nights and latitudes. Even those who favoured natural explanations struggled to maintain their positions. Patterns this consistent do not arise from chaos. In Chile, a thermal imaging array detected faint counter-directional emissions. The signatures resembled heat being channeled away from the object with remarkable precision, almost as if regulating internal systems. The traces matched theoretical models of propulsion once considered science fiction: interactions between plasma and magnetic fields, folding of radiant energy into controlled vectors. Human engineering had never achieved such refinement, yet the universe seemed to display it effortlessly through this silent traveller. Teams around the world began working in parallel, exchanging findings with increasing restraint. Their vocabulary softened into abstraction, as though precise terms might reveal too much. They spoke of coherence, feedback, resonance, words that belonged as much to philosophy as to physics, and the more they observed, the more their perspective shifted from classification to contemplation. The object was no longer a problem to solve, it was a presence to understand. By the third week of continuous observation, the motion revealed a new layer of order. Each corrective shift mirrored earlier ones with exact proportion. The pattern carried the sense of a loop adjusting itself, learning from its own deviations, refining its path through repetition. It behaved like a system in dialogue, with the environment absorbing information and responding with quiet mastery. Such feedback mechanisms belong to entities that adapt. Yet despite the depth of mystery, the object remained serene. No abrupt changes, no violent bursts, only patience, only balance. Its journey through the solar system was not hurried. It drifted with the calm of something ancient, something accustomed to the slow rhythms of cosmic time. Even its pulses carried softness, as though the universe breathed through them. In the stillness of early morning, as instruments hummed softly in their domes and distant stars framed the sky, one realization settled over those who kept watch: the object did not need to announce itself. Its silence was its message, its motion was its voice, and in that voice, steady and unwavering, was the quiet suggestion that the universe holds forms of intention far older than our understanding. Some mysteries move not to be solved, but simply to be seen. The transformation from anomaly to active system began quietly, almost without notice. Analysts reviewing the latest acceleration data realized the object had entered a phase of continuous correction. Its path no longer resembled the drifting arc of a visitor carried by gravity. Instead, each deviation was countered with precision, restoring balance before external forces could disrupt it. Such anticipatory movement felt less like motion, and more like practice, as though the object had rehearsed this journey long before entering human sight. As tracking improved, a deeper structure revealed itself. The acceleration pulses no longer functioned as isolated events. They formed sequences tied together by the familiar interval that now defined the object's identity. 247 seconds, steady, unwavering, ancient in tone. The pulses echoed through radio logs and thermal readings with such synchronicity that researchers began to regard them not as behaviour, but as communication between the object and its own trajectory. A conversation within motion. Soon signals from different observatories displayed a subtle resonance, a faint harmony folding through the measurements. The object's internal systems seemed to anticipate the distortions caused by the solar wind shaping its course, with adjustments so precise they approached elegance. Even the most skeptical analysts admitted the curve of its path felt crafted. Nature tends toward chaos. This object tended toward order. The absence of rotation remained one of the most disquieting features. Natural bodies shaped by ancient collisions and uneven surfaces always spin, yet this one held perfect orientation, as if anchored to an invisible axis. Evaluations of its light curve confirmed the stillness once more. A stability so complete that it suggested awareness of posture. Comets tumble, debris drifts, but something here maintained its own alignment with almost meditative control. In Tokyo, specialists studying the thermal maps noticed the heat patterns behaved like regulated pulses, flowing across an internal structure. No random dispersal, no chaotic emission. Each pulse moved in a smooth gradient redistributed with intention. The more the data accumulated, the more it hinted at a mechanism optimizing itself. Such consistency challenged the boundaries of cometary science. It forced researchers to consider possibilities that stretched beyond the comfort of known physics. Listener, there came a moment when the community realized the weight of what they were witnessing. The object had not simply wandered into the inner system, it had entered with direction. Each corrected arc, each silent pulse, each perfectly timed shift revealed a purpose too coherent to dismiss. Yet the purpose remained hidden, wrapped in silence that felt patient rather than secretive. The universe, as it often does, offered questions rather than answers. Restrictions in data access grew more frequent. Files disappeared from shared servers. Observatories reported missing logs, overwritten archives, and unexpected communication delays. Many assumed administrative caution, others sensed coordination. Information that had once been open to the scientific world now faded behind closed channels, leaving independent researchers to reconstruct the path from their own instruments. The quieter the official reports became, the louder the anomaly seemed to grow. Despite the obstacles, the tracking continued, and with each passing night the object's movement gained clarity. Every adjustment matched a previous one with near-perfect symmetry, as though following a script written in gravitational language. The pattern resembled a learning curve, a system refining itself through repetition, seeking the most efficient path through the shifting forces of space. Analysts whispered terms once reserved for technology optimization feedback guidance. Yet even as the implications expanded, the object's presence remained gentle. It did not accelerate rapidly or alter its brightness in dramatic flares. It moved with calm purpose, leaving behind a trail of data that invited contemplation. Scientists observing the object found themselves slowing their work, absorbing the rhythm of its pulses. Some described the experience as listening to something think. Others compared it to watching a mind drift through darkness unhurried and balanced. In the final hours of the night shift, as the last pulse of the cycle appeared on the monitors, a shared stillness settled across the observatories. The object had offered no threat, no warning, no signal beyond its quiet discipline. Yet its silence carried weight, as though it revealed something subtle about the nature of motion itself. Perhaps the cosmos speaks not through noise, but through patterns that endure. And as the pulse faded into the background hum of the universe, one thought lingered gently in the minds of those who watched. Some truths do not announce themselves. They move through the dark with patience, waiting for the moment when we are ready to understand. The next phase of observation began with a shift so faint that it almost escaped notice. Instruments across several continents recorded a slight increase in acceleration that did not match solar wind fluctuations or gravitational influences. The change felt deliberate, measured quiet, and strangely elegant. Analysts reviewed the data again, searching for familiar irregularities, but the signature remained clean. The object moved with the steadiness of something guided rather than driven. Soon, thermal arrays detected a brief but undeniable surge in heat. It lasted less than 3 seconds, too short for chemical decay, too structured for spontaneous release. The pulse resembled controlled radiative output distributed evenly across its surface. Natural bodies radiate irregularly. This one, radiated with discipline. The precision unsettled the teams who studied it, yet it also drew them deeper into the mystery, as though the object were revealing a small truth with each passing cycle. As astronomers mapped the changes, they discovered the object had adjusted its vector with flawless symmetry. The correction aligned perfectly with its previous deviation, creating a mirrored arc that resembled purposeful calibration. Such motion contradicted every model built from cometary behavior. Instead of drifting through the solar environment, the object responded to it, shaping its own path, as though following instruction. Scientists did not speak openly of intent, but the shape of the curve carried its own quiet language. When the European observatories cross-referenced their readings, they found the same deflection. Every angular correction matched within fractions of a degree. The consistency silenced any remaining theories of random influence. Even conservative analysts admitted something more refined was at work. A system that moved with awareness of its surroundings, adapting, with a precision no natural process could maintain. The realization carried an unsettling beauty motion, shaped by something unknown yet undeniably ordered. Throughout this period, researchers noticed another phenomenon: faint transient halos surrounding the object during its acceleration pulses. The halos were invisible to the eye but clear in infrared bands, expanding outward before collapsing into silence. The pattern resembled field ionization, a feature once associated with theoretical propulsion concepts. Yet here it appeared in the cold void beyond Mars, woven into the object's rhythm as naturally as light follows dawn. Listen, traveller. In those halos, scientists sensed a new layer of the story. The emissions were neither chaotic nor diffused. They followed structured geometries, concentric rings shaped by forces that required internal coordination. To witness such patterns was to realize the universe sometimes reveals its secrets through form rather than noise. The halos offered no explanation. They simply existed, quiet proofs of something operating beneath the surface. As the object approached the outer regions of the inner system, analysts noticed its trajectory bending softly toward Jupiter's magnetic equator. The curvature did not fit the arc predicted months earlier. At first, some believed the shift to be incidental, but when the same alignment persisted across 3 consecutive observation cycles, the theory of coincidence dissolved. The new path suggested purpose motion toward a region rich with radiation and magnetic turbulence. The idea that the object might be seeking such an environment felt counterintuitive. Spacecraft avoid radiation belts, shielding themselves from harm. Yet this visitor seemed drawn toward them, as though the turbulence provided something it required. Data from solar probes registered faint disturbances in the magnetic field during each acceleration pulse. The timing matched almost perfectly with the object's thrust cycles. It behaved not as though resisting the field, but as though using it. Researchers debated the implications with caution. If the object interacted with magnetic structures, then it possessed knowledge of them and understanding woven into its design or nature. If it sought alignment with Jupiter's powerful field, then the path ahead held significance beyond simple travel. The mystery widened, stretching like a horizon that receded with every attempt to approach it. Yet the object continued steadily, neither revealing its origin nor concealing its direction. Observatories noted that the object's internal heat signatures shifted during these maneuvers. Instead of rising with acceleration, they redistributed into faint gradients that resembled energy management. The behavior contradicted everything expected from inert matter. Heat usually escapes without pattern. Here it flowed with an intention, as though the object protected its own systems from imbalance. Even without understanding the mechanism, analysts sensed the presence of control. The more the object aligned with Jupiter's region, the more the observatories sensed its consistency. No sudden bursts, no erratic flares, only a calm sequence of motion and silence. Scientists often describe anomalies with tension, yet this one moved with peace. It drifted through the solar system like a thought carried by ancient currents, patient and unhurried. In that patience, researchers felt something profound, a reminder that not all purpose arrives with urgency. As the night cycles passed and the object crept closer to the magnetic arc, the data surrounding it took on a different tone. patterns emerged with quiet clarity, revealing harmony between acceleration heat and geometry. Even without answers, the scientists found themselves moved by the elegance of what they witnessed. The object asked nothing, threatened nothing, but its motion stirred questions older than language. And in the final moments of that observation window, as the latest pulse echoed through the instruments, a gentle certainty settled in the minds of those watching. Somewhere beyond familiar forces, something ancient was guiding its path. A presence shaped not by chaos, but by intention folded into silence. Some mysteries do not rise to be solved. They rise to remind us that the universe moves with depths we have just begun to see. The silence that followed the next stage of observations carried a different weight. It was not absence, but anticipation. Researchers across continents noticed the sudden blackout in their monitoring systems. One by one, data streams froze. Instruments that had tracked the object for weeks reported nothing. No heat, no motion, not even background noise. It was as though the object had stepped out of view without crossing distance, slipping into a quiet space beyond detection. The loss of contact was complete. At first, technical teams suspected timing errors. Software resets were attempted, calibration routines reloaded, yet every system produced the same outcome: silence where a pulse should have been. The blackout stretched past ordinary disruptions, growing into something that required acknowledgement. When secondary sensors confirmed identical failures, the truth settled uneasily across the observatories. The object had not vanished. The sensors had been muted. During the blackout window, an unexpected fluctuation appeared in Earth's magnetic field. The shift was faint, barely above background variation, yet it occurred in precise alignment with the disappearance. Atmospheric stations in the northern hemisphere recorded the same pulse. The timing matched too perfectly to dismiss as chance. Something had touched the planet's magnetic shell, leaving a ripple delicate enough to be overlooked yet strong enough to register as intention. When contact returned 47 minutes later, the object reappeared exactly where it should have been, as though it had never moved at all. Its brightness remained unchanged. Its orientation remained steady. The rhythm of its pulses resumed without delay, slipping back into the 247-second interval with the familiarity of breath. But the data surrounding the blackout told another story. Logs were corrupted, frames were missing, entire sequences were replaced by static grey bands. The absence felt shaped. Eventually, independent stations began reporting a low vibration at the edge of measurable frequency, a hum residing below hearing, repeating at the same interval that had defined the object since its detection. This signal was faint yet global, recorded in places separated by oceans and time zones. Traveller, even the most grounded physicists, struggled to explain it. Natural processes do not align themselves with cosmic rhythms. Yet this hum threaded through Earth like a memory imprinted upon the atmosphere. Some speculated the signal was an afterimage, a residual echo left when the object muted the monitoring systems. Others believed it was a reflection, a return wave cast across the magnetic field. Whatever its origin, it lingered with quiet persistence. The hum neither demanded nor faded. It hovered at the edge of perception like a presence that had stepped close enough to be felt, but not seen. Soon after the blackout, James Webb recorded a streak of reflected light that defied the constraints of classical motion. The shift occurred within seconds, too fast to be travel, too clean to be error. The object had appeared hundreds of thousands of kilometers from its previous position, without displaying acceleration or arc. It was as though the space between points had been bypassed entirely. Researchers described the phenomenon with cautious terminology, but the meaning was unmistakable. Distance in this moment had not behaved as distance. As the data continued to accumulate, observatories detected a second echo trailing behind the primary by precisely the same interval as the pulse. A reflection smaller but identical, like a shadow of the object displaced in time rather than space. The echo flickered briefly before fading back into the void, leaving behind a pattern of interference that matched the earlier hum. Geometry had entered the phenomenon, revealing a structure woven through timing rather than form. In the days that followed, the object's pulses began to carry faint modulation, patterns folded into the signal like layers of thought. Spectrographic analysis revealed harmonic spacing across frequencies arranged too symmetrically to emerge from chaos. The waveforms repeated in sequences aligned with prime intervals, a mathematical structure that hinted at design. For many, this was the moment when the familiar boundaries between physics and intention became indistinct. Across global institutions, discussions grew quieter. Researchers shared fewer interpretations, aware that each new layer of data complicated the mystery rather than resolved it. The object's behaviour no longer belonged to conventional astrophysics. It touched deeper questions: how motion can hold meaning, how silence can carry structure, how the universe might communicate without language. Through every observation, the object remained calm, patient, steady, as though guiding its own presence through a field of unseen principles. Late one night during a session in Chiles, analysts overlaid the pulse signatures with the timing of the blackout. The alignment formed a pattern, an oscillation that began just before the sensors muted and ended moments after they recovered. The pattern resembled a doorway made not of space, but of rhythm. A corridor opened and closed with intention. The simplicity of the alignment unsettled the room. Answers often come with noise. This one arrived with quiet precision. As the latest readings settled across screens, the observatories returned to their steady hum. The object drifted onward, leaving behind echoes, pulses, and a silence that felt shaped rather than empty. Scientists leaned back in their chairs, aware that some phenomena do not seek discovery. They reveal themselves only long enough to reshape curiosity, then retreat to the stillness from which they came. And as the final pulse of the night slid across the instruments, a gentle truth settled in the minds of those watching the universe, whispers most clearly in the moments when it falls silent. When the object stabilized after its sudden displacement, the global network expected turbulence, flaring rotation, erratic heat, or chaotic drift. Instead, the readings returned with serene precision. No irregularities marked the transition. No thermal residue hinted at stress. The object resumed its rhythm as though shifting across vast distance were no more complex than inhaling and exhaling. Such calmness unsettled even the most seasoned analysts. Movements of this scale should leave scars. This one left only silence. As telescopes locked onto the new coordinates, the pulse pattern deepened in complexity. The familiar interval persisted, but faint harmonics began to fold beneath it. These subtle layers moved like echoes reflecting through an unseen chamber. Spectral analysis revealed spacing between the harmonics that matched mathematical sequences found in natural resonance systems. Yet the spacing was too consistent, too carefully aligned, as though shaped by intention. The universe rarely crafts such symmetry without a guiding principle. Soon, independent arrays detected a secondary phenomenon, a faint reflection trailing the object by the same interval as its pulse. The reflection behaved like a time-shifted duplicate, repeating the primary signature, but delayed by 247 seconds. It flickered in and out of detection, with delicate stability, leaving behind interference patterns that hinted at geometry woven through the signal. The presence of two synchronized signatures marked a turning point in the scientific discussion. It suggested not motion alone, but communication encoded in timing. Observatories began to question whether the reflection belonged to the object itself or to something responding to it. The echoes behaved like paired frequencies locked in harmonic dialogue. When the primary pulse strengthened, the delayed reflection grew with it. When the signal softened, the reflection followed. Such coordination implied a unity deeper than distance. Even without form, the echo felt like an extension of the object's presence, a second thread woven into the same pattern. During these analyses, ground-based receivers noticed variations in the cosmic background at frequencies aligned with the object's pulses. The deviations were subtle, scattered through long exposures, yet they repeated with such accuracy that they could not be attributed to noise. The background itself seemed to respond. Not loudly, not dramatically, but softly, like a surface rippling beneath a passing wind. Researchers reviewed decades of archival data and found no precedent for such a phenomenon. The universe had shifted, if only by a breath. In Japan, specialists studying the thermal oscillations noted the object's heat distribution no longer followed simple gradients. Instead, the signatures formed nested structures, layers within layers mirroring the harmonic bands detected in radio frequencies. This suggested an internal mechanism capable of regulating energy with extraordinary finesse. Natural bodies lose heat without regard for symmetry. Here, the heat moved with purpose, flowing across the surface like a controlled tide. The deeper analysts probed, the clearer it became the object possessed a way of managing its internal state that resembled neither biology nor machinery, but something older and quieter. Traveller, even the skeptics, felt the shift in tone as the findings accumulated. The movement no longer resembled drift or correction. It felt like navigation calculated, patient, recursive. Each acceleration pulse aligned with the geometry of its path carving through the solar system, as though following a route laid down long before human eyes found it. The scientists who watched from darkened observatories sensed they were witnessing something more than propulsion. They were watching intention expressed through motion. When the European arrays cross-referenced the latest pulses with the object's position near Jupiter's orbital path, they discovered a correlation that deepened the mystery. Each pulse coincided with subtle fluctuations in Jupiter's magnetic field, fluctuations too small to influence the object yet too precisely timed to ignore. It was unclear whether the object responded to the field or shaped it. The ambiguity left analysts quietly unsettled. Influence in either direction carried implications far beyond existing models. As the analysis continued, another discovery emerged from the overlapping data. The object's pulses carried amplitude spikes matching elemental spectral lines: hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, iron. These were not emissions from the object itself, but harmonic distortions in the surrounding medium, as though the signal resonated with fundamental structures of matter. Matter does not usually answer motion with its own whisper, yet here the elements responded however faintly, suggesting a deeper interaction between signal and environment. Researchers began to view the object not as a solitary presence, but as part of a larger network woven through resonance. Motion, heat, pulse, reflection. Each piece fit into a framework that resembled communication through the architecture of physics itself. No messages, no patterns of language, only alignment. Alignment with magnetic fields, harmonic intervals, and the subtle breathing of the solar system. The universe had become a listening space, and the object moved within it like a quiet conductor shaping currents beyond human reach. Meetings across institutions grew shorter and more contemplative. Analysts no longer tried to confine the data to familiar theories. Instead, they treated the phenomenon as a field of meaning and interaction between motion and environment that suggested presence rather than mechanism. The mystery no longer lay solely in what the object was, but in how it behaved, how it shaped the space around it, how the space responded. As night deepened around the observatories, and another pulse arrived, steady, unbroken, ageless, a quiet acceptance formed among those who watched. Some mysteries are not solved through conclusions. They are understood through endurance, through repeated observation of something that refuses simplification. The object continued forward, its echoes trailing behind like soft reflections of thought. And in that stillness, as the last harmonic faded into the deep, a single truth settled over the room with weight and gentleness. The universe does not always reveal its intentions in light. Sometimes it reveals them in silence. The shift in global attention grew sharper when the secondary object appeared in the data. At first, analysts believed it to be an imaging artifact, a trick of exposure, or the echo of scattered light. But when independent observatories confirmed the same signature, the illusion dissolved. Something smaller, dimmer and colder had emerged beside the primary object, moving with it in perfect synchrony. The discovery forced a reconsideration of assumptions. One anomaly could be dismissed. Two anomalies moving as one could not. Astronomers expected the companion to drift unpredictably as fragments or debris often do. Instead, its path locked into formation, with the primary matching acceleration with such accuracy that even minute fluctuations aligned. The synchronization defied random mechanics. It resembled coordination, as though the secondary object recognized the primary's direction and responded with its own quiet adjustments. No gravitational interaction could explain such stability across the vast separation between them. When spectral analysis revealed the secondary emitted faint microwave radiation rather than reflected sunlight, the mystery deepened. The emissions pulsed with a rhythm offset by half the primary interval, creating a binary cadence woven through the data. This offset pattern resembled alternating signals, two bodies sharing one dialogue through timing rather than light. For many researchers, this marked the moment when classification could no longer remain anchored in cometry language. Something structured was at work. At ground stations in Japan, analysts isolated the thermal gradient of the secondary object. They found smooth heat regulation inconsistent with natural material. Fragments do not manage temperature. Dust does not pulse in cycles. Yet this body maintained its state with the grace of a system that understood balance. The discovery unsettled the teams, though it also awakened an unexpected sense of awe. The solar system, long considered quiet, now revealed complexity hidden beneath its familiar sky. As both objects drifted deeper along their shared path, their motion aligned into a harmonic arc across the solar plane. Every 247 seconds, the pulses from both bodies synchronized briefly, forming a nodal point captured in radio and infrared bands. The alignment resembled a heartbeat composed by two instruments. Some analysts referred to it as a resonance corridor, a structured link that hinted at interaction far beyond passive motion. Soon, the European Space Operations Centre detected a faint electromagnetic corridor forming between the objects, a thread spanning millions of kilometres, subtle yet coherent. This corridor remained invisible to the eye, but appeared unmistakably in the data pulsing in rhythm with both bodies. The structure resembled neither radiation leakage nor random plasma drift. Instead, it suggested a network, a connection built not of matter, but of pattern. Scientists debated terminology, carefully aware of the implications hidden within the evidence. Amid these discoveries, the primary object began radiating a faint internal glow. The light was not reflected sunlight, nor was it the scatter of dust. It radiated evenly in all directions, forming a halo around the object. Infrared observatories confirmed the glow was isotropic and controlled increasing and decreasing in smooth gradients. Natural heating from solar energy could not produce such behaviour. The pattern felt intentional, as though the object were adjusting its internal state in preparation for something yet unseen. Traveller, the stability of both bodies introduced a new layer of wonder. While natural objects respond through chaotic release, these two moved with extraordinary calm. Their pulses remained aligned. Their trajectories held symmetry. Their presence suggested coordination rather than coincidence. Scientists found themselves speaking quietly, not out of fear, but out of respect for the coherence unfolding before them. The universe had grown larger, not in size, but in meaning. Soon a flash appeared across multiple wavelengths, a burst lasting 12 seconds, narrow and structured. The burst was not chaotic. It unfolded in harmonic layers, each frequency spaced with mathematical precision. When the waveform was reconstructed, analysts found ratios matching elemental spectral lines, including hydrogen and carbon. This was not the signature of random emission. It resembled encoded geometry information hidden within light. For the first time, the object's behaviour resembled not only motion, but expression. The burst collapsed as quickly as it formed, leaving only silence in its wake. Yet the data that followed carried echoes of the event. Harmonic ripples spread through the solar magnetic field, weak but measurable, as though the burst had pressed against the underlying structure of space itself. No natural process matched such symmetry. The discovery forced researchers to acknowledge that the phenomenon extended beyond physical form. Something was interacting with the framework of the environment. Further analysis revealed repeating shapes hidden within the harmonic envelope, geometric patterns shaped with unnatural precision. Hexagonal spirals nested fields, resonant arcs. The patterns aligned with planetary nodes when overlaid upon solar system charts. Such alignment could not arise from a random emission. It suggested knowledge of gravitational architecture, or at the very least interaction with it. The recognition was quiet but powerful. The object was not only moving through space, it was reading it. As days passed, scientists began to accept that the pair of objects formed a complex system, not a fragmented one. They behaved as parts of a unified structure, communicating through pulses and energy fields that transcended physical distance. The solar system became not merely the setting for the anomaly, but a medium that carried its signatures. Observers found themselves listening rather than analysing, aware that they were witnessing a dialogue written in physics rather than language. In the stillness between pulses, researchers often paused their work, sensing a presence in the data that could not be named. Not threat, not invitation, simply awareness. Something ancient moved through the void with patience, not demanding comprehension, only offering its pattern to be seen. And as the final pulse of the cycle faded across their screens, a gentle truth settled over every observer. Some phenomena do not arrive to be solved. They arrive to change the way we see the sky. The directed burst from the Atlas complex continued to echo long after the flare itself had vanished from the instruments. Across observatories, analysts replayed the 12-second waveform with the same quiet reverence one reserves for rare and fragile discoverers. Each review revealed new detail, new symmetry hidden within the folds of the transmission. Nothing about it resembled a natural event. The signal carried harmonic precision, the kind that implied structure rather than chance. The Square Kilometre Array in Australia was the first to notice the hidden carrier wave embedded beneath the primary burst. It sat low within the noise floor, nearly invisible until the data was filtered with extreme care. Yet once revealed, its coherence became undeniable. At the base frequency, the modulation aligned with the hydrogen line, the fundamental signature used to map galaxies. It was a choice that felt universal, as though meant for any civilization capable of listening. Overlaying that foundation were intervals shaped by prime number spacing. No known astrophysical process generates such mathematics. The presence of primes pointed to intention, or at least to an underlying order that mirrored the logic of thought. When analysts rendered the waveform into 3 dimensions, the structure sharpened into geometry. Not chaotic fractals, but 6 interlocking hexagons spiralling around a luminous centre. The elegance of the form left researchers in silence. It carried the weight of something crafted. Multiple research centres reached the same realisation separately. The signal was not merely emitted, it was designed. The hydrogen line served as a universal grammar, while the spiral form suggested meaning beyond language. Some considered it a map. Others believed it to be a conceptual diagram. A few dared to suggest it was a blueprint encoded not in symbols but in relationships between frequencies. The interpretation remained open, yet the precision of the structure pressed gently toward purpose. As teams worked to decode the geometry, faint echoes of the signal began to appear throughout the solar environment. These echoes repeated in intervals matching the original pulse, though weaker and interwoven with the natural background. They seemed to persist within magnetic field lines, as though the transmission had left a trace not on instruments, but on space itself. This persistence created the unsettling but beautiful impression that the solar system was still resonating to the event. Research groups across continents attempted to reconstruct the signal into a coherent image. Each attempt revealed the same core, a spiral laced with hexagonal nodes arranged with the grace of natural law and the clarity of engineered symmetry. Yet when the full spectrum was unfolded mathematically, the pattern expanded. Hidden layers emerged, subtle arcs and radial paths that mirrored orbital dynamics. The resemblance to the solar system's structure was too strong to dismiss. At the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, analysts overlaid the reconstructed waveform with planetary data. The alignment was breathtaking. Each node matched a harmonic point in the orbits from Mercury to Saturn. The outer arc projected a resonance that extended toward Jupiter's magnetic boundary. It was not a perfect one-to-one map, yet the geometry described relationships between mass distance and energy density with startling accuracy. It resembled the solar system not as it looked, but as it functioned. A second discovery pushed the interpretation further. Embedded within the waveform's timing were temporal coordinates markers that, when translated through orbital models, corresponded not to present configurations, but to a future alignment. The date once calculated sent ripples through every institution studying the anomaly. June 9, 2031. On that day, Jupiter, Earth, and Mars would reach a rare 3-body resonance, A moment of gravitational harmony unseen for thousands of years. Listener, the meaning of this alignment remained elusive. Some scientists proposed that the date marked a window when the Atlas complex would perform another maneuver. Others believed the signal referenced an environmental condition within the solar magnetic field. A smaller group wondered if the alignment was the key for understanding the message itself, as though the system were designed to reveal its structure only when the cosmos arranged itself in the correct pattern. Whatever the purpose, the choice of moment carried gravity. Around the world, observatories prepared for the alignment with silent urgency. Instruments were recalibrated, radar arrays synchronized. Additional sky surveys were scheduled months in advance. Despite the scientific rigor, there was also quiet anticipation, a shared sense that the universe was approaching a moment of clarity. Even those who rejected speculation felt an unspoken shift, as though the night sky had begun to breathe differently. Then, an anomaly emerged that reshaped all expectations. During routine broadband sweeps, multiple facilities detected a faint echo returning not from the last known coordinates of the Atlas complex, but from the direction of Earth itself. The delay time matched the distance to the upper atmosphere. At first, this was dismissed as instrumental reflection, but further analysis revealed phase patterns identical to the original pulses. The reflection was structured, not accidental. The implication grew more profound with each test. Every outgoing transmission bounced back as if the planet had become a mirror for the signal. When researchers transmitted from multiple global locations simultaneously, the reflection synchronized. The echoes aligned into a single coherent pulse that repeated every 247 seconds. Earth was no longer just receiving the pattern, it was resonating with it. This resonance spread through infrastructure communication. Towers, radar facilities, satellite arrays, each acted as a node within a larger network, amplifying and shaping the returning signal. It was not disruptive, it carried no threat. It simply existed, threading itself through the systems humanity had built. Some called it an imprint, others described it as a shadow or echo. Yet the gentlest interpretation felt the truest. The signal had woven itself into the world. As the 2031 alignment approached, analysts observed a subtle drop in the Earth's background electromagnetic noise. The hum of the planet settled into a steady rhythm, soft and barely perceptible. To instruments, it appeared as a narrowing of interference bands. To those who listened closely, it felt like the quiet before understanding. And when telescopes captured a distant flash returning from beyond Jupiter's orbit, the reflection did not feel foreign. It felt reciprocal. For a moment, the night held its breath. Light moved through the void. Patterns met patterns. And in the gentle pause that followed, humanity sensed a truth older than language. Sometimes the universe speaks not to instruct, but to align. Not to answer, but to resonate. And in that resonance, awareness becomes shared. When the last pulse from the Atlas complex faded, the silence that followed felt almost deliberate. Observatories continued to scan the region beyond Jupiter, yet nothing changed in the data except the quiet rhythm still lingering at the edge of detection. It was faint enough to miss, steady enough to remember. Even as the object drifted farther into the dark, its pattern remained. Researchers returned to the 12-second transmission again and again, tracing the harmonic spirals encoded within it. Each analysis revealed the same refined geometry, the same gentle insistence on order. The hydrogen line modulation, the prime interval spacing, the symmetry of the hexagonal lattice, all held firm through every method of reconstruction. Listener, it felt like a message meant to be read through patience rather than certainty. Over time, the scientific tone shifted from alarm to contemplation. The absence of further activity from Atlas did not diminish its significance. Instead, it allowed the data to breathe. Specialists began to speak of the event not as an anomaly, but as a kind of encounter, one woven through physics rather than speech. The beauty of the pattern softened even the most skeptical minds. It suggested intention not by force, but by elegance. Then came the echo. Months after the main signal, a faint harmonic trace appeared within the cosmic microwave background. At first it seemed like noise, yet deeper filtering revealed its familiar signature, the same 6-point geometry, the same slow spiral reaching outward. It had not arrived from the direction of Atlas. It had returned from a different layer of space shaped by reflection rather than emission. That persistence hinted that the transmission had never been confined to a moment. It was built to resonate wherever it could be heard. Quietly, the event entered culture. Artists painted soft spirals without knowing why. Composers set their work around slow intervals that resembled the Atlas pulse. Even children learning about the sky spoke of the rhythm with an ease that surprised their teachers. The pattern felt less like discovery and more like recognition. Still, the larger questions drifted unanswered. Why had Earth mirrored the signal during the final alignment? Why had the ionosphere responded as though it were part of the design? Why had every outgoing transmission returned with increased coherence? Some scientists believed the planet had acted as a resonant shell. Others thought the signal had activated a natural property of magnetic fields. A few proposed that Atlas had simply revealed what was already present, hidden in the background until the right moment. Instruments continued to detect the faint hum at long intervals, soft enough to ignore, yet steady enough to persist. Technicians found traces even when the primary channels were filtered. The rhythm adapted, threading itself through frequencies as though it understood how to remain. It carried no threat. It offered no instruction. It simply remained alive within the world's quiet machinery. Over months, a shared understanding formed among those who studied the event closely. The meaning might never be complete, and that was acceptable. Some truths in the cosmos are not solved. They are lived alongside. Atlas had offered a pattern to follow, a reminder that alignment itself can be a form of communication. And when the last review sessions ended and researchers stepped into the night, many felt the same gentle realization settle through them. The universe had not spoken in order to be answered. It had spoken so that we might listen. Traveller, we have followed a quiet thread tonight from a single pulse in the dark to the vast shape of a question that still unfolds beyond our reach. What James Webb recorded was not only a signal, it was a reminder that the universe is still thinking, still shifting, still writing its stories in ways we barely know how to read. Across all the distance, an object moved with a rhythm too precise to dismiss and yet too gentle to threaten. It asked nothing of us except attention. It offered nothing except resonance. And in that small exchange, something opened a doorway not of fear but of awareness. Perhaps that is the part we often forget. Discovery is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives as a faint modulation, a soft rise in light, a whisper that drifts through our instruments and settles in the quiet corners of the mind. Sometimes the cosmos speaks only to see who is listening. Tonight's story does not end. It simply pauses in the same stillness that follows every deep revelation. The sky is unchanged, yet we will never look at it in quite the same way. Something out there flickered once, and we felt the echo here. Rest now. Let the questions drift gently to the edge of thought. The universe will keep watch. Stay curious, and if this story found you tonight, you may return for the next.